Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. I wish you all a very good afternoon on this cold, rainy English summer's day. First of all, could I invite the people in the kitchen to stop whatever they're doing and be quiet? Just politely. Very good. So the theme for the afternoon is Buddhism and the pursuit of wealth. So I see the hall is fairly full this afternoon. So a few people interested in this, and when this topic was suggested, I thought, oh, that'll probably be an item that will draw some attention. So one of the things that is often said when people come to visit is that they'll ask a question like, how do you run this place? How do you pay the bills? Because I thought Buddhists didn't believe in money. You say, well, it's not quite that way. As a Buddhist monastic, as monks and nuns, we don't use or accept money. We don't own money. I haven't used money since 1978. But only a very small proportion of Buddhists are nuns and monks. Most Buddhists are ordinary householders. They go, oh, really? So oftentimes people have that impression, particularly Westerners, and that also the understanding that the Buddha was completely sort of anti the attitude of materialism, or was against people owning any kind of material wealth. So I thought it would be an interesting theme to talk about this afternoon, because that's I would say a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the teachings. But it's understandable enough, because you get many instances in the suttas, say, for example, where one of the famous arahants, Ratapala, he was from a rich family, and he went back as a monk to visit his hometown, and was on alms round, and then his parents saw him coming to the door and didn't recognize him, and kind of shooed him away and said, "This is one of those horrible shavelings who took away our dear son," and kind of seduced him and deluded him. So get out of here, go away. They didn't realize it was their son at their door. Oops. So then he went round to the back of the house and got some yagu, some stale porridge that one of the servant women was throwing away. He said, well, if you're going to throw that porridge away, just throw it into my bowl, and that'll be my food for the day. So he was quite content with that. Anyway, the family found out about this, and then they invited him round for a meal the next day. So he accepted a meal, and they were trying to persuade him to leave the robes and go back to the household life. And they piled up a whole mass of gold coins and bullion in the middle of the floor, and said, "Please take this. This is your wealth. This belongs to you." And he said, "If you are wise, what you'll do is you'll take all this gold and this bullion and take it out into the middle of the river Ganges and dump it in the midstream of the river Ganges, because on account of all this money, then there's the suffering and pain and sorrow will arise for you." So. So that sounds like a very sort of anti-materialistic, anti-money kind of attitude. Also, there's a whole section of the Samyutta Nikaya called the Labha Samyutta. The discourse is about wealth, and it's about wealth and praise and fame. And throughout this whole section of the Samyutta, the Buddha is really down on the pursuit or the attachment to gain and wealth and fame and honor. And he says, he uses very quite harsh language. He says, wealth and fame and gain, these are bitter, these are terrible, these are vile, these are an obstruction to freedom. And he uses some quite punchy imagery. He says it's like a dung beetle that like a dung beetle that collects dung to make it into a big ball. He says, people who collect wealth, they're like a dung beetle who's gathered this big ball of dung and said, I've got the biggest dung ball. I'm full of dung. I'm stuffed with dung, and I've got the biggest dung ball. Look at me. How great I am. And he said that's what it's like when someone is obsessed with wealth and gain. They're like a dung beetle. So it's deliberately insulting language and challenging. So if you want to leave the Dhamma Talk now, please. So please do. But I'm not trying to be insulting, but just say, yes, the Buddha does use quite harsh language, and there are quite sort of shocking stories, like taking a pile of gold and saying to your parents, if you really want to do the right thing with all this money, take it out into the middle of the River Thames and dump it. And so it's easy to get the impression that, well, therefore, the Buddha was completely against any kind of ownership or any kind of wealth or any kind of property, but that's not really the case. What he points to is rather the skillful understanding of wealth and of the way that the mind relates to that, and the skillful use of it. So the problem is not so much whether somebody is wealthy or works hard and acquires a lot of money, but it's entirely based around the attitude that there is towards it, how the mind is guided towards accumulating wealth, pursuing wealth, chasing after it or acquiring it, and what they do in relationship to it. Many years ago, I was told an interesting story about John D. Rockefeller. When this was a story of about 100 years ago, and at that time he was the richest person in the world. So I think that Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, is now currently the richest human being on the planet. And so put Jeff Bezos instead of John D. Rockefeller, because a few of you are thinking, John D. who? What? Huh? It's ancient history. Well, at that time he was the owner of Standard Oil and was the richest person in the world. And he was being interviewed, I believe, by a reporter from the New York Times, and they were on this golf course. He didn't even pause his round of golf for his interview. And so the reporter asked him the question, Mr. Rockefeller, you are the richest man in the world. Can I ask you, how much money is enough? So apparently John D. Rockefeller thought for a moment and said, just a little bit more. Which showed he did have a bit of insight. He knew, even though he was the richest person in the world, there was still that sense of it's not quite enough. A bit more would be good. But also he could hear himself saying it, so he was also understanding it's never enough. So that what the Buddha points to in the teachings is that feeling of it's never enough. And so the relationship of the acquisition of wealth and power and influence, and the craving mind. Because there's within Buddhist psychology, as probably many of you know, there are two different words for desire, two different words for wanting or desiring, or how we can give our mind direction. So the first kind is tanha. So most of us are familiar with the Four Noble Truths. And the first noble truth is the truth of dissatisfaction, of suffering, of dukkha, that we are not totally happy all of the time. We experience dukkha, we experience dissatisfaction, imbalance. And then the second noble truth is that the cause of that dukkha, that feeling of discontent, dissatisfaction, is tanha, is cravings, a self-centered craving. So that kind of desire is directly labeled, that is the cause of suffering. So many of us who've come across Buddhist teachings at an early age or many years ago, it's kind of chapter 1, page 1 Buddhism, the desire is the cause of suffering. So that's one kind of desire, tanha, and the word literally means thirst. And the word tanha always implies a quality of self-centeredness. There's always a sense of I, of self-concern, self-interest, and there's a quality of agitation, of restlessness in there. The other kind of desire is called chanda, chanda, chanda. And so that is, rather than being necessarily the cause of suffering, that the Buddha outlines as being a necessary precondition, a necessary condition for anything that we try to do in life. And so it's really in consideration of this area of Buddhism and the pursuit of wealth or livelihood and how we relate to money and work and so forth. I feel it's probably one of the most important things to understand is the distinction between tanha and chanda. What is a skillful desire, a wholesome desire, and what is self-centered craving, because they can look really like each other, like the left hand and the right hand, but they're also kind of opposites. The Buddha outlined a series of qualities. As we know, he's a great list maker, and so one of his lists is what's called the 4 bases of success, the 4 iddhipada. And so this says 4 qualities that are needed to carry out any kind of activity in life, to do anything. Whether it's cooking a meal, whether it's coming to Amaravati to listen to a Sunday afternoon talk, whether it's training your mind in meditation, whether it's robbing a bank, or whether it's how to, say, understand Buddhist terminology. And these 4 qualities, so in themselves, they are morally neutral. It's just these are the 4 things that need to be there in order to carry out any kind of task. So the first one is chanda. So chanda means desire. It also means interest or enthusiasm. The English word zeal, like I want to come to Amaravati, or I'm interested. I need to cook some food, or I want some more money, and I know how to hack the bank's computers. I can rob the bank. Or I want my mind to be more peaceful. I'm interested for my mind to be more peaceful, to be more aware. So that interest needs to be there, chanda. Then the second one is virya, is energy. So that having got that interest to come to Amaravati, then you have to apply energy. So okay, if you want to come to listen to the Sunday afternoon talk, you can't just sit on your couch and wait for it to be posted on the website, or you get up and come here. So there needs to be interest, there needs to be energy, that sense of application. And then the third one, and these first 3 all work together. The third one is called citta, and in this instance, citta means thinking things through. To say, consider. Okay, now if I want to come and listen to the talk, how am I going to go about doing it? I haven't got a car at the moment. Who can I get to give me a ride? Or what time do I need to leave if I have got a car? Or will my friend want to come along with me? I should give her a call, and so on. So the first 3, chanda, virya, and citta, they work together. So you need to be interested, you need to apply energy, and you need to think about what it is that you want to do. So whether it's running a business, coming to Amaravati, robbing a bank, cooking a meal, training your mind in meditation and realizing full and complete enlightenment, all of those activities require these qualities. And then the fourth one, which is kind of on its own, is vimamsa, and that means reviewing or say looking at the results of what we've done. So did we get to Amaravati? Did the meal get cooked? Did the bank get successfully robbed? Did my mind become peaceful? Did I realize full and complete enlightenment? So the vimamsa, in a way, is the most important part, because it's like, well, did the effort that I was putting into that work, what did it result in? Yes, I started a business, I made a lot of money, but I've driven all my family completely nuts with my with my obsession with the business. I made some money, but everyone around me is frightened of the sight of me, and I've alienated and upset all the people that I live with. Aha! So I got a certain amount of good result, but there's also this negative qualities came with it. Or yes, I put a lot of effort into meditation, and my mind has become peaceful. Therefore, that tells me this particular approach to meditation was helpful. It was good. It hit the mark. So vimamsa is looking at the results. So it's the essential element for the feedback, because that informs us what we do in the future. So if you've started a business and made lots of money but alienated your family and your friends, then the vimamsa is telling you, okay, if I want to get back together with my family, if I want to reestablish those friendships, I need to change the way I relate to this work. I need to change the way that I've been operating, because this is just making life more difficult. This is like Ratapala talking to his parents. This money is a cause for suffering and pain and difficulty. So I need to change. Or the vimamsa, that end result can show us, yeah, this is going well. This has had a good result. I wanted to cook a meal, and this has come out. I enjoyed cooking it. It tastes really good, and there don't seem to be any negative results from it. Great. So that that is how we would use a desire in a skillful way. So the Buddha points out that to achieve anything in life, we need that kind of desire. We need that kind of chanda. And so that it's a mistake, again, within the Buddhist world, along with considering that Buddhists don't use money or don't have any money, that Buddhists shouldn't have desires. And probably a few of you have run into this in the workplace when you say, "Oh, I really like that office up, with the view over the park." And they said, "What do you mean? You want the office with the view over the park? I thought you're a Buddhist. You're not supposed to want anything. That I thought Buddhists didn't have desires." So it's a common understanding or common perception that if you're calling yourself a Buddhist, that you never desire anything. But it's not a matter. The letting go of desire that is talked about in terms of Buddhist practice is to do with the quality of craving, of tanha. That's the desire that needs to be let go of. That self-centered, agitated quality of craving. That's what needs to be let go of. But the other kind of desire, that which gives our life a skillful direction, that which makes wise choices, that is a necessary condition. We have to use that. If you're interested in the suttas, there's a very helpful exchange in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses. And it's a dialogue between Ananda and a Brahmin called Unaba. And Unaba asks Ananda, what is the Buddha's teaching? How does he? What does he say is the essence of his teaching? And then Ananda says, well, it's the letting go of desire that's that is the essence of the teaching. And and then Unaba says, well, how do you do that? And he says, and Ananda explains, well, you have to want to let go of desire, and then you guide your life in that direction, and then desire is let go of. And then Unaba says, but that's kind of circular. How can you use desire to get to the end of desire? And that doesn't work. That's interminable. It's not terminable. So Ananda says, well, okay, Unaba. So here we are in the Gositarama, in Gosita's park. Now, did you earlier today want to come to Gosita's park? And he said, yes, I did. So then, having arrived at Gosita's park, what's happened to that desire to come here? Well, it's fallen away because I've arrived. And Nanda said, so there you are. You desired to come to the park. You've arrived in the park, and then that desire has been fulfilled. That you wanted that, and then you achieved the thing that you wanted, and the desire has gone away. And so that in that little sutta, that discourse, it's in the section 51 of the Samyutta Nikaya. Ananda spells out these 4 bases of success, describing to Unaba, you had to want to come to the park, you had to make the effort to come to the park, having thought about how you get here, you've arrived, and so then now you have arrived, then that desire has been fulfilled. There's no painful result from it. You needed to get to that goal. You've arrived at it. So then it falls away. There's no painful result. There's no negative result of following that particular direction. So, with respect to our working lives and the relationship to money. And again, I'm a Buddhist monk. I have been since I was in my early 20s. I became a novice when I was 21, and bhikkhu when I was 22, and so my entire adult life, I stopped using money when I was 21, so I haven't used it for a long time. But I've been around Buddhist practice and lay Buddhist practitioners for many, many years. So I have some experience of how this all works together. So if we are able to guide our actions and our choices, our work, and the way that we relate to money and its resources with, say, that application of the quality of chanda, then we can work hard at our jobs. We can recognize, yes, I would like to send my children to a good school. Yes, I would like to have a house with a roof that doesn't leak. I would like to be able to drive a car that's, if you set out, it's going to arrive where I want to get to without breaking down. There's reasonable things to wish for, and I can make the effort for those things to happen. But that doesn't have to be tied up with a self-centered craving. It can be just giving my life a skillful direction, putting effort into that, thinking about how it's going to work, and then seeing how it's worked, following it through, seeing the results of it. So we are able to give direction to our life, make choices, and to relate to our work, and to aim to succeed in our work, to succeed in, say, acquiring resources for our benefit, for the benefit of the people around us. And that can be done, just like Ananda describing it to Unaba, that can all be done without creating any kind of stress or tension or difficulty within us. So in the Buddha's advice to lay people, there's a particular sutta called the Sigala Sutta in the long discourses, the Digha Nikaya, sutta number 31. Again, don't be too impressed with these numbers. I looked it all up this morning. Yesterday. So the Sigala Sutta, and the Buddha is giving quite detailed advice to how to live as a layperson. So in that, he doesn't say to Sigala, if you were really wise, you'd give all your money away and shave your head and become a monk. Sigala hasn't said, I want to become a monk. So the Buddha doesn't make that presumption that that's what he wants to do or that he should do. He's made a choice to be a layperson, so the Buddha is giving him advice of how to live skillfully as a layperson. And then in terms of his money, his resources, the advice he gives him is to divide it into, to see it in 4 chunks. So take 1/4 and use it to enjoy yourself. 25% of the money that you have, use it to enjoy yourself. 50% of it, 2/4 of it, put that into your work, invest, put that into your business, or use that to support your parents or your family, your people who work for you, your friends, and to use it for charitable donations and such like. And 1/4 of it, 1/4 of your funds, put that away as savings. So 1/4 of it used to enjoy yourself, 1/4 of it put it away for savings, and 1/2 of it use for your everyday activities, investing in your work, your family, and for supporting various charitable causes that you see as being worthwhile. So in that teaching, it's to me it's interesting because there's a lot of very detailed advice in that sutta. That there's nowhere that the Buddha says, if you are really wise, you should give everything away, and that you shouldn't have any money at all. But rather, he's saying, you've chosen the life of a householder, so if you do this, then this is the best way to use your resources. Because essentially, I feel it's important to understand that money is really just a kind of energy. It represents a sort of capacity to make changes in the world. It represents a set of human agreements that are there between one person and another. Like on the English, I don't know if it still says it on English money that I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £1 or £10 or £50. So money is an agreement. We agree to give this piece of paper or this Bitcoin or this check a certain value. It's an agreement between people. And it's an agreement that is referring to resources of energy, that if you have £100, then you have the resources to change the world to a certain degree, to that amount. And so that just like using energy, our physical energy for walking or working, or the energy of the electricity that goes into the lights, it is just a form of energy. And so that if it's guided and steered in a particular way, or we have a lot of energy available, why should that be something that's intrinsically obstructive or intrinsically harmful? Again, it's all to do with the attitude that the mind has towards it. So, for example, that I feel that advice he gave to Sigala was very, very helpful. This is how to use your resources. And similarly, there were great disciples of the Buddha that were extremely wealthy, like Anathapindika, who had donated the land for the Prince Jeta's grove, and then other donors like King Bimbisara or King Pasenadi. There's no place in the suttas where the Buddha says to Anathapindika, really, if you are wise, you should just give away the rest of your money, or to King Pasenadi, you should renounce your throne, disband your army, give all your money away, and be a monk. He never says that. He is extremely respectful of the choices that people make, and so that someone like Anathapindika, who was extremely wealthy, he gave him advice on how to relate to his wealth, his power, his resources, but he didn't make the kind of presumption to force or to suggest that Anathapindika should say go without his money, but rather, okay, you've got this money, you've got this energy, this power available to you, so here's how you can use it skillfully. So then Anathapindika, as probably people are familiar with, that he was the one when he had met the Buddha and he wanted to provide a monastery. He found this piece of land outside of the city of Savatthi that belonged to Prince Jeta, and Prince Jeta didn't want to sell it, and so then Anathapindika covered all of the ground with gold, hundreds of thousands of gold pieces. And he didn't have quite enough to cover the entire acreage of the Jeta Grove. And so because Prince Jeta had asked for a ridiculously high price, and Anathapindika tried to meet it, but he didn't have quite enough. There was a little empty space around the gateway. And then Prince Jeta said, okay, well, I'll give you the bit by the gateway free as long as you name the place after me. So he had a bit of an ego problem. So it's known as the Jetavana, Prince Jeta. But he was so he gave a little bit of it, but it was really Anathapindika who was the main donor. So then, in respect to in terms of wealth and how we develop our wealth, I'd say that whatever we choose to do, whether we've inherited a lot of money or whether we have worked hard and created a bit of money. We don't really have very much, but we have small resources. Whether we worked hard and we've created a lot of money, we have a great deal of wealth and prestige. It's in terms of Buddhist practice and the Buddhist relationship to wealth, then the advice is, well, to work hard, your chosen profession, and sometimes that's going to bring in a lot of wealth, sometimes it won't. Sometimes a lot will come in and a lot will go out. But those are not the primary considerations. The primary consideration is the mind's relationship to it, and also the ethical standards that we keep in relationship to money, how we acquire wealth, how we relate to wealth, and how we use it. So, in relationship to both pursuing wealth and also the way that it's used, I'd say that there's two particular areas that are significant in terms of our practice. One is that of sila, the precepts and virtue, and the other is that of contentment. Because if we use unscrupulous or unskillful, illegal ways of acquiring wealth, then no matter how much we've got, then that's going to conduce to kind of inner discomfort and insecurity, fear of being caught by the authorities and such like. And there are also just the negative effects generally about acting in unethical ways. So there's the area of sila, but even if you've worked hard and you've acquired your resources in a wholesome way, you haven't broken any precepts, the aspect of contentment is crucial, because rather like Mr. Rockefeller, just a little bit more would be enough. That if you're the richest person in the world and it's still not enough, then what's it all worth, really? That you're not experiencing that quality of the puna dhamma, the quality of fullness or completeness. Interesting enough, talking about extremely rich people, just before he died, Steve Jobs, who was one of the founders of Apple Corporation and the inventors of the iPhone and iPad, probably sitting in most of your pockets and handbags, and that all around the world. So Steve Jobs was dying of cancer, and he was being interviewed again by a reporter about his life and his perspective and what was important to him. And then he was talking about what was significant as his life was wrapping up. And he made this very interesting comment. He said, "What's the point of being the richest corpse in the graveyard?" Which is, I think, is a very insightful way of looking at it. What's the point of being the richest corpse in the graveyard? What was it worth? Okay, you die with a big pile of money, but the money stays and you go. So so I would say that Mr. Jobs had maybe even a little bit more wisdom than Mr. Rockefeller. So in terms of sila, then I feel this is and the pursuit of wealth. This is something that is really important because we can get a bit crazy around money. Again, I'm speaking as a monastic, and I don't have any money, and I don't control money. But Amaravati costs £1,000 a day to run. So even though I don't control it or don't own it, I'm involved with how it's used in terms of decision making and such like. So that it takes money to run places. It takes money to use things in everybody's life, whether you're a lay person or a monastic. But for lay people, the stakes are higher, if you like. The control is closer, and the sense of ownership is infinitely stronger. So we can go a bit crazy around money. I'm not reading anybody's mind. If you're thinking, how does he know? It's, again, as I usually say, this is statistics, not psychic powers. That we all, when there's a possibility of lots of money or sort of finding an easy way around things, we find ourselves taking a way that gives us an extra advantage, or we manage not to pay a particular tax, or that we kind of take a little bit extra for ourselves, and our thinking mind can justify it. But it's like being drunk or being slightly crazy or in love. Your judgments are not trustworthy, and that it's very, very hard to make judgments in relationship to money with non-attachment. One time, in most Buddhist countries, in Thailand, like everywhere else, even though monastics are not supposed to own money or control money at all, it's kind of uncommon, the standard we have through Wat Pah, to really have no money of our own. And a monk once came to Wat Pah, Ajahn Chah's monastery, and he had money, and so that he said he wanted to come and stay and study with Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah said, "Well, if you stay here, you've got to relinquish your money, otherwise you can't stay." He said, "Oh well, I don't really need to relinquish it. I'm a Mahatera. I've been a monk for more than 20 years. I'm not attached. I just use it for the temple, for Dhamma activities." And Ajahn Chah said, "If I put a kilogram of salt in a bag in front of you, and if you can eat a kilogram of salt and tell me it doesn't taste salty, then I'll believe that you can use money without attachment." You follow the logic of that. He said, and if you can do it with a kilo, I'll give you 100 kilos. So basically, Ajahn Chah was clear that we go a bit crazy around money, and so that then having a clear ethical standard around wealth, the acquisition of wealth, and the use of money is really crucial to our peace of mind, because Buddhist practice is about ending suffering, about living skillfully and ending suffering. So I often tell an interesting story in this respect. I used to live in California for about 15 years, and our monastery is in the sort of remote countryside region, a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours drive north from San Francisco. And I would come down once a month and give a talk in the main city area, and then stay overnight and then go back the next day. So I was staying in San Francisco, and there was a particular Thai restaurant where they would offer a meal, and so I'd stay overnight in San Francisco, and then receive a meal at this restaurant, and then go back to the monastery. So one day in this restaurant, this Thai woman came to speak to me and said, "Can I talk with you a little bit? I've got a bit of a problem I want to discuss with you." And I said, "Certainly." And so she told me this story, and I often share this with people because I feel it's a really good example. And she said, "I'm a single mother. I have a 9-year-old son, and we live in a small apartment, and we haven't got very much money. I work in an estate agent. That's my job. And a few weeks ago, this person came into the office, and they said, I've got this property, and I need to sell it really fast. I don't care how much money you get for it, but it's worth a few $100,000. But I've got to leave the country within a couple of weeks, and I need the money now. So whatever price you post it at, then I'm happy with that. It's probably worth about $400,000 or $500,000. But if you can only get $250,000 for it, that's okay. That's fine. Just let me know." And so this person left the details with her, and then left the office. A few minutes later, somebody came in and said, "I want to buy a property, a commercial property, and I need this place and in town, and I've got plenty of resources. It's not exactly money no object, but I can kind of meet the price. So if it's up to $500,000, that's really no problem. So if you've got something that is with these particular qualities, let me know. I'm really interested." So she said, at that moment I realized, well, this person came in half an hour ago and gave me this property, and they're happy to get $250,000 for it. I can give it to this new customer for $500,000. Nothing's been written down. I'm the only one who's seen the paperwork. It's all happened within a span of 20 minutes or half an hour. I'm the only one who knows about it. I could sell it for $500,000 and tell the seller that we only sold it for $250,000, and $250,000, if you can do the sums, goes in my pocket. And so she said, so this was a big temptation. And so this was right in front of me. But then in that moment, I had to decide, what to do. So, cut a long story short, she said, I decided that even though I look after the bookkeeping at the estate agent, so I'm looking after all the numbers, and I know I could have hidden it easily and kept the $250,000, and no one would have known. But I decided not to. And so that money would have made a big difference to me and my son, and we could have found a different place to live. I could have got better schooling for him, better things for him. But I decided not to, and so I wanted to know what you thought about that. And so she, as she talked about it, she said, did I do the right thing? And so my first answer was, well, absolutely you did the right thing. Absolutely you did the right thing. Well done. That must have been a difficult choice to make. But you definitely did the right thing. And so I'd say, sadhu for you. And then she said, well, I'm glad you said that, because I felt it was the right thing, but I wasn't sure. And also my son, he's quite good at maths, and so as a kind of game together, and to help him with his schoolwork, I would walk him through some of the bookkeeping that I did for the office. And so she said, I actually told him what had happened, and I walked him through how I would have fudged it, how I would have fixed the books, and I also told him that why I hadn't done it. And I said, well, that's an interesting way to go about things. That she was skillful enough to tell our son she'd been tempted, and also to show him how she had been tempted and how she could have done the trick and stolen the money. And and then I said, so what did he think? And she said, well, he took a moment to answer me. He said, well, I would have liked a new bicycle. And we are kind of squashed into this apartment, but I get it, Mom. I get it. Yeah. And so I felt that was a really good example of good parenting. And that also, that child will remember that for the rest of their life. And that, and then he also understood that even if she had taken the money, that she would have been in a state of stress, worried that they were going to be found out, worried that the authorities would catch them, afraid there's just the two of them, and that if she got caught, then she's going to be in jail, and who would look after him? And so that he saw that it was an act of great kindness that she didn't do that, and that also that she had that quality of peace of mind. And so I said, well, did you tell your boss what happened? And she said, well, I'm thinking about it. And I said, well, it's up to you. I don't make decisions for people. I said, but I would consider telling your boss what happened. And I suspect that your boss would give you a raise. So I don't know whether that actually happened. But I don't make people's decisions for them. And I said, but I think that if you told your boss that story, that he would be extremely impressed with you and would be ready to acknowledge he's got a really good employee and would want to reward you for your honesty. So that that's one thing, a story I like to share, and I feel is a really good example that wealth is not just the size of the number in the bank balance, but it's directly related to the quality of peace of mind, because you can be incredibly rich and still be miserable. Yesterday I was meeting some people, a fellow who used to work for De Beers Diamond Corporation, and I've often mentioned my godfather was a partner of De Beers Diamond Corporation. He was what they call a sleeping partner, which means he didn't do any work, he just collected the money. That he was a cousin of Harry Oppenheimer, who was the owner of De Beers. So he was my godfather, not because of any particular spiritual influence that my dad wanted him to bring on my life, but more like just trying to connect me to some cash when I was growing up. Because my mum and dad were both very poor, so it was my father's skillful means of trying to connect me to some money. But my dear godfather, Raymond Oppenheimer, who lived in a very plush house, White Waltham Place near Maidenhead in Berkshire, 2 Rolls Royces, RO1 and RO2. He never had to work, he played golf, bred bull terriers, and he died completely miserable. Completely miserable. And so that he had everything in the world, never had to work, just sat back and collected money, just passed his days as he chose, as a gentleman of leisure, and he was completely miserable. So forgive me, Uncle Raymond, for using you as an example again, but I feel his misery is a good lesson. You can have everything, a stately home in Berkshire, and still be two Rolls Royces and still be completely miserable. So the quality of sila and that peace of mind that is essential in terms of being able to enjoy our wealth. When we do the little verse after people take the 5 precepts, there's a little verse that we chant. Imani panchasika padani silena sugatingyanti silena bhoga sampada silena nibutingyanti tasama silang visodaye. So it means these are the 5 precepts. Precepts are the source of happiness, sugati. Sila are bhoga sampada, they lead to true wealth. Bhoga is wealth, sampada is like abundance or fullness or completeness. Silena bhoga sampada. Silena nibutingyanti, the sila leads towards peacefulness. Tasma silang visodaye, therefore should sila be purified. So that and then I often say that it doesn't mean if you keep the 5 precepts that you'll win the lottery. I'm sure many of you heard me say that on the weekend. But bhoga sampada, it leads to true wealth, which means it leads to contentment. It leads to that ease of heart, which is the quality of well-being that is more precious than anything that any amount of money will not satisfy. Another interesting point on this score was we're close to Ashridge Management College. Maybe some of you work at Ashridge. Hopped across the valley for this on a Sunday afternoon. So Ashridge Management College is a sort of high finance teaching center. And many years ago, there was a couple who were having a wedding blessing here. One of the husband of the couple was a portrait painter, and he'd done the portraits for a few people who work at Ashridge. And so when they had the blessing, he invited a few Ashridge people to come to the blessing. And I was a junior monk then, and I was given the job of sort of being, and also being sort of chatty in English. I was given the job of, well, can you talk to the wedding guests and sort of introduce them to Buddhism and give them some kind of explanation about Buddhist principles? So between the end of the meal offering and before we had the wedding blessing, I sat down with about 20 of the wedding guests and talked about Buddhism, and particularly talked about sila, because the couple had wanted to have the 5 precepts as part of their wedding blessing. And one of the people that the husband had done the portrait of was a teacher at Ashridge, and he came up to me and said, this is really interesting, because kind of the way that it works, I see that you work for God and we work for Mammon. On either side of the valley, you're the kind of the spiritual types, and we're the materialist types, looking at each other across the valley here, with Golden Valley in the middle. He said, but it's really interesting, because the principles that you talked about in terms of Buddhist practice, and particularly your attitude towards morality, so that's exactly what we teach in the business world. It's exactly the same. And he, very briefly, he said that if you're in business, the most powerful commodity, your most powerful asset, is people's trust. It doesn't matter how valuable your shares are, or what your kind of physical resources are. If people don't trust you, your business is going down. And even if you have small resources, you're a small company, or you haven't made a big profit, if people know they can trust you, you'll do fine. And that quality of reliability, if people know if they make a deal with you, you'll follow through with it. If you say, I'm sorry, we can't do it, you mean we can't do it. It's not that you're just favoring somebody else. So that he said that is a strange thing, but that's what we try to impress upon people in the business world. If you kind of fudge things, or you are kind of deceptive for the sake of a quick profit, you might get a profit quickly, but you will lose trust, you will lose faith of people, and your business won't thrive. And so that I felt was a very interesting comment from someone in the finance world. Another little story I often tell in this respect about money and sila is, again, from when I was in America. There was a woman, a friend of ours, who was a corporate lawyer, a Wall Street lawyer, and she was a lawyer for a big finance company. And the owner of the company had a client who was thinking of making some serious investments with them. And so they went out to lunch in New York City, and they were eating at a restaurant outside. And so at the end of the lunch, it looked like this client was going to be putting something like $500 million into the company as like a big investment. And that this friend of ours, this woman, if the deal went through, she would be the lawyer for drawing up all the papers, and she would get the cut. She'd like get 1% or 0.5%. So 0.5% of 500 million is $2.5 million. Thank you very much. So she stood to gain quite a lot. And at the end of the lunch, and the client had gone away, then the boss turned to her and said, "So what do you think? It's pretty interesting, huh?" And she said, "No, we shouldn't do business with that kind of a person." He said, "What do you mean? It looks pretty good to me." And she said, "Did you see what he did with his glass?" And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That there was this glass of fruit juice, and this fly landed on the edge of the glass. And then he took his straw and he knocked the fly down into the dregs of the fruit juice. And then he took the straw and he held the fly down and drowned it as he was talking to us." Did you notice that? And he said, "Yeah, I did actually. That was kind of weird. That was pretty freaky." He said, and she said, "We shouldn't do business with someone who acts like that." So she gave up $2.5 million on the life of a fly. And so then that her boss realized, I think he realized before, but he realized this woman can really be trusted. But this person, their moral values are more important than just cash in the bank. And so I'm not asking you to give up large money-making opportunities just randomly, but I feel that that quality of contentment and ease within the heart is really precious. And that when we think about wealth and acquiring wealth, rather than fudging the laws to get a little bit more for ourselves, to think clearly and say, well, what's going to be the result of this? If I get this, how will this sit in my heart? Or is it really worth it, to compromise oneself in this way? And to speak about contentment a little bit, a final story I'll share with you. This concerns Ajahn Vimalo. Ajahn Vimalo, probably many of you know him. He's been a monk for more than 20 years now. Very colourful, eccentric character. He was a very gifted artist. So he worked in a photographic company in London. He was a photo retoucher. He used to do fine photo before Photoshop existed. He had a business. He was worked in this business, touching up photographs for advertisements, and he was very, very skilled at his job. Had an incredibly fine eye, and so there was someone in his company who he'd actually hired, but this fellow had climbed up the ladder and was now his boss. And so during the last few years of his life in the company, Ajahn Vimalo, he knew he wanted to be a monk when his kids were grown up. And he recounted just before he left the company, a couple of years before, this dialogue he had with this fellow who was his boss, and his boss was, because the idea of him going off to become a Buddhist monk was a bit bewildering, and that was off in the distance. But even while he was working with the company, his boss found him very confusing to work with, and so he said, and Ajahn Vimalo's name was Paul Hendrick at that time. So his boss said, Paul, I can't understand you. You're really good at your job, but you only work 3 days a week. I mean, if you kind of put your mind to it, you could make a lot of money. Why don't you? I mean, why do you only work 3 days a week? And then Ajahn Vimalo said, well, I live in a little cottage in Suffolk. I've been restoring a windmill for the last 15 years. My windmill is now complete. I can sit in my garden. I can enjoy the flowers. I can look at my windmill. I can climb up and look over the Suffolk countryside. I sit in my garden, read the newspaper, and enjoy the English sunshine. And I can do that 4 days a week. I haven't got any debts. My kids are either at school or at college. I've got plenty of time at home. I can walk my dogs, and I've got everything that I need. So why would I work more than 3 days a week if on 3 days a week I can live the life of Riley, as they say, sit in the garden, enjoy the flowers, enjoy the sunshine, and take my ease. And he said, well, what about you? He says, how many days a week do you work? Well, 6. Well, 6.5. Okay, you work 6.5 days a week. Yeah, most weeks. Yeah. Sometimes it's actually all day Sunday as well. So you work 6 or 7 days a week. How many houses have you got? He says, well, right. Whew. Well, there's the flat in London, and there's the cottage here, and there's this house in France. So kind of 2 houses and a flat, and then there's the place by the beach. So kind of 3 houses and a flat. So how many mortgages have you got? Well, 3. Okay, you got 3 houses and a flat, 3 mortgages. How many cars you got? Well, there's the one parked up on the coast, and there's the one I keep in London, and there's the one in France as well, of course, there's that. So, and you're paying tax on all of those cars. Well, yeah. So do you have any debt? Well, of course I've got 3 mortgages, and of course I'm in debt, stands to reason. So you got 3 mortgages, you work 6.5, 7 days a week, you're paying tax and you've got debts to up to your eyeballs, and you're thinking that my lifestyle is weird. I mean, don't you see that I'm actually enjoying my life, and I've got time to enjoy it? And you're making all this money, but you've also got piles of debt, and you haven't got enough time to enjoy it. So, but I'm making a lot of money. And it was interesting. This conversation was more than 20 years ago, so I'm not remembering every detail. But at the time, Ajahn Bimalo said his boss and him looked at each other and thought, and both of them were thinking, I don't understand this bloke. So that, I feel, is also a message about contentment. That in terms of the pursuit of wealth and the way we relate to wealth, that I would say if we change the dynamic from trying to find happiness from getting what we want or getting what we like, to turn it around, to sort of twist it around and to see it differently, that if we can learn to be content, to like what we have, we work to make things go in a good way, but if we can flip it around so that we, rather than finding happiness from getting what we like, to learn how to like what we've got, then we are able to really enjoy the things that we have, and it's never. We're not kind of torturing ourselves with that. It's never enough. It's never enough. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. Otherwise, it's like chasing the horizon. We never get there. It's never enough. We never get to that place of. So I feel this quality of well-being and contentment is the greatest richness. That kind of fullness of heart, the Bhoga Sampada, that true wealth is that quality of contentment and having. There's nothing to lose. You're completely content and open to the way things are in the present moment. And maybe to finish with a little story, Ajahn Sujito, I'm sure many of you know him very well. He was the abbot of Chithurst for over 20 years and a good friend of mine for 40 years. So in his early days as a monk, he was a super ascetic. So he really liked kind of hardship and discomfort, and he was kind of very zealous ascetic, and had very, very few possessions, and anything he had was pretty kind of ragged and minimal. And so he was spending the rains retreat down in the West Country. This was before the Devon Monastery existed, and he was down there for a while. And the couple whose place he was staying at, they found out it was his birthday. This was after the rains retreat. It was in November, Ajahn Sujito's birthday, and they gave him a present, this little box, and he gave it a bit of a scowl. I thought, oh, what's this? And then he looked at the card, and the card said, "For the monk who's got everything." And he thought. And for those of you who are familiar with that kind of phrase, that generally means some kind of little trinket that is completely useless, a sort of a pretty little thing that is completely superfluous to any kind of real use, but it's a sort of a sweet nothing. And so for the monk who's got everything, and so he said when he saw that, he thought, oh dear. So but they've given it as this gift, and they had this kind of smiles on their faces, and he thought, okay, well, I better play along and be polite. So then he opened up the box, and inside the box there was a little badge, and on the badge it said, "I've got everything." And he was so happy. It was the perfect gift. So anyway, the time has gone past 3:00 now. The minutes have flown away. The hour has gone. So I'll leave my reflections there and offer this for consideration.
My question is, how can you be content when you don't feel like you fit in?
Well, being content doesn't necessarily mean being completely passive, and so that this is a frequent sort of question for the area that people need to explore and to understand. When the feeling is one doesn't fit in, then you can't just sort of snap your fingers and make that different. But I would say that there's first of all that quality of attitude that there is in the heart in relationship to that feeling I don't fit in, and to use the meditation to look at that, to say in a way make friends with that awkward feeling, that sense of not quite belonging, not quite being part of things, being out of tune or a bit of an outsider. That that is something that many of us experience, and probably is one of the most common feelings within the Buddhist world. And so that, first of all, I would say that not being of an attitude that I shouldn't have that feeling, or that that feeling has to go away, but rather this is a feeling that we can have as a human being. Luang Por Sumedho often talked about having that feeling himself, even well into his monastic life. He'd make these comments like, I feel like I'm an alien, really. I've never quite felt I belonged in the human race. And it's also is helpful to understand that the Buddha said about the five khandhas, the body and mind. These are alien. These are an affliction. These are a burden. So that feeling, in a way, the feeling of being a bit alien and not quite fitting in, that's very possibly more in accord with reality than the sense of I'm totally with this. Does that make sense? So that I think making friends with, or making space in the heart for that awkward feeling of I don't quite belong, I don't quite fit in, I'm not quite part of this scene. Just in the tea period, someone was asking me about how I entered into monastic life so young, and there was really that sense of that I couldn't really follow the people who I was growing up with, the people I was at school with or at college with. I couldn't understand how they could just sort of leave college and go and work in a bank, or do a postgraduate course. It's like, well, what? How can you be content with that? Or why is that meaningful to you? So I'm very familiar with that feeling of being a bit different to everybody around me. But I feel that it's important just to know that attitude of mind as a human emotion. There's just a way that we see our own life, and that sense of awkwardness or not quite fitting in or not quite belonging, rather than say assuming that's wrong and it shouldn't be there, to get to know that and say, well, this is the way that life feels in this moment, because like any other kind of attitude or feeling, it comes and goes. It's not there all the time, right? It's not a permanent thing. So we might tell ourselves the story that I feel like I don't fit in, but maybe if you actually sort of kept a timer on it, that would be like 10% of a day, and the other 90% of a day, then it's not there, or it's not relevant. So that's the first thing, I think, just to, in a sense, let that feeling of awkwardness or not quite fitting in be known as it is. And that also, then the second part, I'd say that contentment doesn't mean being passive. And that's often understood, that being content or non-attachment, when we talk about that, then people can easily assume that means, well, therefore, sort of do nothing, or sort of switch off, or be a doormat, as they say. But it doesn't mean that at all. And one of the reasons I like to talk about the basis of success, or the Buddha's teachings about right effort, is that making skillful choices in our life is very much part of the path. Acting on that kind of desire and giving direction is not an intrusion upon our peace of mind. It's working with the way things are. So if I like to quote the famous soliloquy from Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. So that, translating that into ordinary English, then should I just be a doormat and just let life happen to me, suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles? Do I contend against the world, or do I just become passive in the face of the world? But the middle way of the Buddha is neither being completely passive or contending against the world, but learning to work with the world. That's the middle way. So Hamlet's two options didn't include I would say, the most helpful one, and maybe that's what Shakespeare intended. Who knows? But if we are, say, understanding contentment in the skillful way, that is being at ease as you go about your work. So rather like we can walk and be relaxed in the walking. We can run and be relaxed in the running. The body is still going from A to B, but you're at ease, you're relaxed. You can be, alternatively, you can be walking in slow motion, but really going somewhere. You know? So that the attitude of contentment and inner relaxation, it doesn't mean doing nothing or trying to sort of freeze things or be passive or not take action, but rather it's the way that we go about the work that we do. So Ajahn Chah used the expression, learning to walk one step at a time. You're walking, but you're just walking one step at a time. There's not that sense of me getting somewhere, but there's a relaxation into that activity. So similarly, that contentment, and maybe you, in terms of going back to your question, maybe, and you can perhaps clarify that, maybe you feel like you should do some work to help yourself feel like you do fit in a bit more, or help yourself to fit in a bit more. And that might be worthwhile, but I would say that the most, in terms of the way you ask the question, the most important things are both to let yourself be at home with feeling awkward. I do a lot of mindfulness of awkward feeling. That sort of, oh dear, this is exactly what I didn't want to have to deal with, and here it is, feeling. Oh dear, somebody's asked a question, I haven't got a clue how to respond, feeling. And then when you notice that's just a feeling, something goes, oh, this is just awkward feeling. Oh. And then it's still, the situation hasn't resolved itself, but the attitude towards it is more spacious, more easeful. So that in many respects, understanding that contentment means, yeah, you still go to work and you still do what you need to do, but there's not that that kind of desperation, or you're not feeding that sense of incompleteness. Each moment is absolutely perfect and complete as it is, and yet in that moment we can be working to bring things to a greater sense of fulfillment or benefit for ourselves and others. But the contentment is also in the attitude. I'm working to make this better. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. But right now, everything is okay. Like we have the long-term plan for Amaravati over the next 30 years. We'd like to rebuild the whole of the monastery, apart from the temple and the cloister and such like. Will it ever happen? I don't know. If it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, okay. So the contentment is in the way that we pick up the way that we work. And so then in terms of finances and money, then you do your best, and then if money comes in, okay. If money doesn't come in, okay. And you make your choices based on that, not in a foolish way, but you are sort of guiding your actions as best you can by looking at the results of what you've done, using that reviewing, that vimamsa element. Does that make sense? So, any other questions? Don't be shy. There's one at the back there. Looks like Don again. So also, it's often the same people ask the questions every week, so not that I will ban certain people from asking questions. Don is free to speak, but I would encourage the quieter amongst us to be brave and to practice non-attachment towards your hesitancy, and to be brave and step forth sometimes. But anyway, Don, please don't be intimidated.
I hope this won't working. Yeah, I hope this won't.
No, it's not switched on. There, that sounds like it's on. Well, otherwise the question doesn't get recorded.
Yeah.
There we are.
I hope this won't arise any feelings within you, this particular question, Ajahn Amaro. But I just wanted to point out the fact that you, of course, referred to the Sigalovada Sutta, the Buddha's advice to Sigala. Mm-hmm. But there are also some really interesting radical statements that were made by the Buddha on wealth, because he talked about the creation of wealth without violence. And that was something which he advised the rulers of his day at the time. Then he also highlighted 5 trades that people should not get engaged in or support, which were very radical at that time and even now. But I feel that the sense of Buddhist ethics on economics tends to be today for the demands and the challenges of sustainable issues. I think the Buddhist economics appear to provide the way of sustainable living that I can come across.
And the question is?
You might want to comment on it.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And when I was pondering the theme for today, there was a lot of different elements, and I thought, well, how much can I cover in a 1-hour talk, and what areas do I want to emphasize? So, and I figured that well, things that I leave out and I don't cover, then probably somebody will pop up in the questions session and ask about those. So, well done. So, yeah, the Buddha spoke about right livelihoods. Some are jivo and wrong livelihood, and then amongst the wrong livelihoods that he enumerated, they are dealing in weapons, dealing in poisons, dealing in slavery, and it is because the first precept refers to not killing any living creature, then any work that involves killing animals is implied. It's not mentioned in the kinds of wrong livelihood, but the ones that are specifically named also include dealing in poisons, and if I'm remembering correctly, dealing in alcohol and intoxicants. So those are the 5.
Trading in meat as well.
It's not one of the wrong livelihoods.
No, the 5 that he was cautioning against engaging
Animals.
in animals.
Yeah. Animals and slavery, yeah. But so those are the wrong livelihoods that he enumerates, and so that the question often comes, well, what about bankers? You know, is banking a kind of wrong livelihood? And so that the wrong livelihoods that are enumerated are the things that are directly involved in harming other living beings, either human beings or animals of various different kinds, and that those are so intrinsically unwholesome and are to be avoided. So that the other livelihoods that are more tangential to that, like banking, you might say, well, the banks support the arms industry, and so therefore that's exactly the same. And that's a subject of considerable debate. And I'd like not to get into that too deeply here, but I would say that nowadays, because of the extent of information that's available and the extent of possibilities, the choices that we can make about who we choose to work for, who we choose to bank with, the things that we choose to buy, the markets we choose to support, they all have an effect. And that, but again, I would say that it's the attitude of mind with which we pick up those principles. So, like if you become fanatical about ethical banking, and anyone who banks with Barclays or with Lloyd's or kind of a high street bank, that you kind of you spend an hour and a half haranguing your family members over the dinner table and causing them and yourself deep distress over their banking choices. I would say, well, look at what you're doing to your mind in that moment. Yes, there are those issues, but what's happening to your mind right now? So again, I'm not reading anybody's mind, but this happens so easily and so often. I lived in California, and there's an extremely intense level of ethical concern there in Californian society, and particularly amongst Buddhist meditator types, people who are very deeply involved, and many of whom launched and lead socially active causes. But one of the difficulties that comes is the degree of stress and conflict that comes within the mind of the individual and between the people and their family members, the people and their co-workers, how you're taking a noble cause or a fine ethical standard, like encouraging a livelihood that doesn't involve killing animals or selling weapons or supporting abusive working systems like gold mining and diamond mining that's sort of physically destructive to people, or the tobacco industry and such like. So that these are ethically noble causes, but then in your well-intentioned support for that noble cause, you are then causing misery for yourself and the people around you and breaking up families. So that's that's an element I feel it's really important to bring to mind. And the story is often told of Ajahn Sumedho recounted, where he and I maybe in some of these other Sunday talks I've already mentioned this encounter where Ajahn Sumedho, as a young monk, took great exception to the conduct of another monk at Wat Pah Pong at his main monastery. And when Ajahn Chah was away, even though Ajahn Sumedho was quite junior, he took it upon himself to scold this monk because he had very abusive and destructive speech habits. His speech was very coarse and very aggressive and very inappropriate, and his speech was very upsetting to a lot of other people. And the young Bhikkhu Sumedho couldn't understand why the teacher wasn't scolding him or setting him straight or doing something to sort him out. And so when Ajahn Chah was away, then Ajahn Sumedho took the opportunity to very publicly shame this monk. And so then he was indeed shamed, and then left the monastery a couple of days later. But sometime afterwards, when Ajahn Chah had returned, he took the young Venerable Sumedho aside and said, Sumedho, you really did wrong. Do you think I didn't know that monk's speech was so awful? And then he used the phrase, his mouth was evil, but his heart is good. Bak bab, der jai di. His mouth is evil, but his heart is good. And you made it impossible for him to live here. So you were right in fact. All the things you criticized him for, yes, they were all accurate. But you were right in fact, but wrong in Dhamma. So I feel that principle is so important when we come to ethical issues and lifestyle choices and those kind of concerns, because we can get so focused on one particular issue that we can cause immense stress and conflict within ourselves and between ourselves and other people, and not notice it. So just to give a little example, if I can remember this correctly. So somebody on a 10-day retreat I was leading in June, somebody took it upon themselves to say, I'm very concerned that the kitchen at the retreat center, that they use cow's milk and they use cheese. This, everyone knows that the dairy industry is incredibly destructive, and this really shouldn't be allowed. And so, and this fellow was maybe he's here today, but he was very, very sincere about this and very focused and very intense. And so it was obviously a very strong issue for him. And I'm not dismissing that, but I then said to him, well, it's interesting that you say that, because somebody who came on this retreat they came from the States, they came to visit with their family just before the retreat. They said they were being scolded by another supporter of the monastery for flying all the way to England with her kids for a holiday. So how can you bear to get on an aeroplane just to go on holiday? This is destructive to the environment and completely appalling and unbearable. And then that person, she herself, would never get on an aeroplane. And so, and I was saying to him, well, so that person feels that way about aeroplane flight. You feel this way about the dairy industry, and his immediate response was, well, it's not the same. And I said, well, but to her, flying on an aeroplane is completely unacceptable. To you, the dairy industry is completely unacceptable. Other people, the use of plastic is completely unacceptable because of their understanding of the destructive impact of plastic in the ecosystem and in the oceans and the waterways and on human health, animal health, and so on. And so I was just using that. I mean, you can go on and on and on, but I feel that in that dialogue that you could tell there was a certain amount of editing going on. They said, well, it's not the same. That's just plastic. That's not as significant. Or well, it's just plane flight. It doesn't have the same impact. So I'm not making judgments about individual people's choices, but to look, how do we pick that up? How do we sort of the things that we feel strongly about? Are we creating more suffering around that? Are we putting energy in a skillful way? Is there chanda? Is it being driven by chanda, by skillful desire, or is it tanha? Is it I'm going to set you right because you're wrong and you shouldn't be doing it this way? And unless you change, I can't be happy. And so you have to change because if you don't, it's wrong. And so I would feel in this area, it's really most helpful to us to turn the attention back and say, okay, what's in my heart when I'm undertaking the effort to help this person see that they could make better choices? Am I trying to make them different so I will feel happy? Is it for me or is it for them? Is it for the world? Do I want you to be different so I'll feel better? What's driving this? And that's something that each of us can only know for ourselves. We can't put ourselves into other people's minds. So I really encourage that, particularly with this area of ethical choices and the impact of the work that we do, the companies that we work for, the things that we use, the things that we support, to consciously be cultivating a way of working, a way of acting, so that there is the support for peacefulness and harmony, not to be passive, because we can work vigorously towards benefiting ourselves and others, but we can work with peacefulness and contentment and clarity, or we can work with stress and aggression and bring much more pain and division into the world, because things create their opposites. And again, because when I was in California, it was frequently the case that then the families that were the most had the most eco-sensitive and ethically committed parents, the children would, as teenagers and as young adults, would be just driven straight towards the most kind of indulgent and destructive and materialistically obnoxious behavior, because the parents were so sort of ardent and sort of hammering their children to kind of be this way and don't be that way, that there's a kind of rebelliousness that conditions, and then the kids would sometimes just turn out the opposite. So we can't control what other people do, but we have to, I'd say, really keep an eye on how we're handling our rightness and to be addressing these areas and communicating with each other and carrying out our work so that the way that we work mirrors the result that we're aiming towards, rather than using a destructive or an aggressive, contentious means and hoping we're going to get a peaceful end. So, any other questions? Maybe from someone who's never asked a question before. Silence. Yes, there's a hand there.
Thank you, Ajahn, for
Can you switch it on?
Is that on?
Yes.
Thank you for a very useful talk. Something you said sort of as a joke in passing made me think, have you got any advice about the National Lottery, doing the lottery, and lay practitioners?
It's a gamble to ask the question. Well, interestingly enough, and the mind might leap at this, gambling is not against the precepts. But in that same Sigalovada Sutta, the Buddha names it very specifically as a way of, quote unquote, wasting one's substance. So that it's not intrinsically obstructive or destructive, but it's unwholesome. So that within the Buddha's approach, you have things that are actually against the precepts and are very intrinsically have a negative karmic result, and then there are things which are just unwholesome. So gambling is considered under the unskillful, unwholesome category. So it's not technically against a precept, but it's really stupid. And so people are free to make their own choices, but again, I'd say it's down to what does it do to your mind. How much are you relying on the hope that the lottery is going to come in and quote unquote all your worries will be over. There's all kinds of stories about people who won the lottery and that was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Also, it's interesting when you do talk to people who are extremely rich. Like I remember meeting Mitch Kapoor, who invented a very significant piece of software called Lotus 123 way back in the mists of time. So he was the inventor of that, and he sold it for $5 billion. So that was a profit. But I met him on some kind of Buddhist event, and he said he gets dozens of begging letters every day. So a lot of what he has to deal with is people asking for money from him. You're a good-hearted person. You've got this massive pile of cash. So here's my good cause. Please, 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 please. You've got to help me because. And that kind of effect of being extremely wealthy. Oftentimes people don't realize that. Oh, if you win the lottery, how does the rest of your family relate to that? And when you were getting on very well with all your sisters and brothers and your cousins and your kids and it was all fairly even and easy, and suddenly you're worth 200 million quid, and then everything goes sour because you helped her. Why don't you help me? And I want this. It's only a couple of million. It won't even make a dent in what you've got. And then there's a lot of challenges that come with that, and stresses and strains. So that I feel that if people think things through and then look at the attitude that they have, then you make your own choices based on that wise reflection, and then it's up to you to work with it. I'm sure a lot of you would like the opportunity to have to work with the problems of having won the lottery. Please give me the chance. Yeah. But that's up to you. Yeah. I wouldn't advise it, but people are free to make their own choices. Gambling is suffering. So, any kind of hoping, when you make a bet, hoping is suffering, waiting is suffering. So that the more that when I get this, then I will be happy. That's a state of dukkha. And so because it's placing fulfillment and contentment over there, that I can only be happy when I've got this result, when my kids have got to the right college, or they pass their exams, or when I've got this promotion, or when my product has been sold, or that we've got the new house, we got the mortgage paid off, then I can be happy. So when the mind sets it up, waiting for something to happen or hoping for something to happen, that means in this moment, life is incomplete. That the Dhamma is not here and now, it's over there, after I've got the result. But the teaching is always, the Dhamma is akaliko, it's timeless, sanditiko, apparent here and now. That total fulfillment and peace and contentment is here now. It's not when the result has come in. It's not over there. It's always here. But our worldly conditioning is always setting up that dynamic of over there, just over the horizon. When I retire, when the weekend comes, when I get on the retreat, when I've paid off the debt, when my kids are in college, when I've won the lottery, then. And so by setting up that dynamic, it devalues what's here now. And the Dhamma in its full glory and magnificence is here now. It's not. And so if we say, well, this is just ordinary, this is just kind of a Q&A, 5 minutes left of the Q&A on a Sunday afternoon where it's kind of finished now. But then, when I get on the retreat, or then. So the worldly mind is continually devaluing the present and inflating the past and the future. And so that attending to the present, this is the advice of the Buddha in the Bhaddekarata Sutta, to not dwell upon the past or the future or create ideas of the self in the present. That's the perfect abiding. That's the quality of blessing, the kind of what he calls a fortunate attachment, or the quality of blessing comes from being awake to this. So you can stand in a queue and not be waiting. You can be expecting the exam results to come through the letterbox. Well, they've all come now, I think, so for people. The A-levels and O-levels have all arrived now. But you can be not waiting. They're still there, but you're not in that state of waiting. And so then that the mind is able to really open to and appreciate the fullness of this present reality, here and now, rather than, when this has been paid off, when that problem has been solved, when the bell has rung, or when I get on the retreat, or when I get off the retreat, or then. It's the Paccuppanna Dhamma, the here and now present reality, that is where richness, where fulfillment and true contentment can be found. Yes, there's... If you can, there was one behind, but
Just like the mic.
Please be embarrassed with the microphone. If you could.
I understand and I appreciate totally what you're saying. And then so the worldly mind comes in, and so I don't think I'm. So that's life seems very much involved with this going out and dealing with other worldly aspects like agencies and zero contracts, and so livelihood work often involves not much money. So it's this dance between being here now and then the sort of unfortunate, dissatisfying realities of the worldly structures that aren't that sympathetic to right livelihood sort of work, like working with the elderly, or if you've got to look after somebody, and someone in the family has got ill, you've only got a very small amount of money the government are giving you to do that. So there's all those sort of aspects. So I don't know what the question is, but it's learning to be present and content and complete with this very unsatisfactory financial anxiety that can hover. So I suppose the question would be, because I think you answered the question a bit when the lady said about not fitting in, and I think it's the same answer probably, but you can be gripped by the slight sort of financial anxiety, which is about that survival anxiety. So I think you've answered it already, so I hope, sorry, but
no, it's a very good point. I mean, it's worth sort of stressing, because that the mind goes, if only I had things a bit better. I'm having to work with this difficult system. The NHS is not very helpful, and I haven't got that much money. If only. But and I'm not dismissing that. But if we consider, well, the fact that the NHS exists at all, the fact that the kind of medical treatments and the facilities that are available in the 21st century, compare that to a couple of hundred years ago, or compare that to a lot of countries around the world, then what is available to us, even as we're struggling, is a lot better than many other people certainly have had in past ages and have around the world. So I'm not just saying, well, you should be content with what you've got, but rather look at how the mind is always saying it's never quite good enough. Because again, I've been around people who are extremely wealthy with incredible resources, and it's still not quite enough for their child in the hospital, and the doctors are not doing a good job, and they could be doing better, and it's not fair, and it's not right, and it could be more. And so that's why over and over again, just bring the attitude, the attention back to the attitude. You do the best you can to improve the conditions you can. You talk to the authorities. You work things as skillfully as you can to use the resources that are available to the best extent possible. But the most important thing is what attitude we bring moment by moment to what we're experiencing, because that's what's going to really help. And to paraphrase or to sort of slightly misquote a famous character out of American popular culture, Fat Freddy, Dharma will get you through a time of no money better than money will get you through a time of no Dhamma.
Oh, very good, yeah, I like that one.
The original from Fat Freddy was dope will get you through a time of no money. But since this is a Dhamma talk, and we've been talking a lot about the precepts, I want to give Fat Freddy his credit, but I feel that the Dharmic version of that is more appropriate and skillful, especially with cameras everywhere, and everything's being recorded. But I'm serious, and it's not like saying, well, 100 years ago it wasn't like this, or you should be grateful. All around the world people have it much worse than you, but they do. And I think we very easily become, what we're experiencing is normal, because we're experiencing it. It's what we've grown up with, or what's around us. So we take that as the benchmark. And if we take a step back and consider a bigger picture of how it could be if we didn't have these resources, or in a different time with a different situation, then that helps us to see that in a perspective. That, okay, perhaps in a different time, in a different way, it could be different. I'll do my best to work with what's available here and now. I'll work hard at that. But the most important thing is that I don't create conflict within myself or between myself and others. The main thing I'm doing is having an attitude of being awake and non-contending. And then you're working hard with a peaceful heart. And that's something that we can do. We can work really hard with a peaceful heart. So again, one of the things I say frequently, when people say, "Oh, you're so busy, Ajahn. I know things are really busy for you," and I know it's a bit of a platitude. I say, I try never to be busy. I'm active, but not busy. Like, oh God, Ajahn Amaro being pedantic again, And English isn't the first language of like 70% of the people I live with. But it's a different thing, and that we can be really active with no stress. But being busy implies a stressfulness, like, all this stuff, waiting, hoping, stressing, waiting for it to be over. Whereas if we have an attitude of contentment, santuti, is the Pali word for contentment. If there's santuti, there's real contentment in the heart, then we can work really hard, we can be really active, and it's not stressful. It's just, okay, it's 5 to 2, what should I be doing? Oh yes, Sunday afternoon talk, right, okay. Get to the sala. That's what's happening then. And so that the way that we set up the mind in the attitude, that makes all the difference. And that's something that we can do. We can't control what the world does, or what the programs, the NHS or the social services allow and support. We can't control that, or what the economy is going to do. If it's going to go down the tubes when Brexit happens and such like. We can't control that beyond a certain small proportion, but we can control the attitude that we have to the moment-by-moment experience. That's where we have a power, an ability. And that, I would say, that's the real wealth, is that paramita, the spiritual strengths that are here in our heart that can be brought to each moment. That's the real bhoga sampada, the abundant wealth, is in the paramita, that is present, that this mind can use in relationship to the opportunities that are there and the difficulties and challenges that are there. So the mind can dwell upon, oh dear, I've got so little money, and my dear family members, and I wish I could do more of this, and I haven't got enough for that. True, but what is the mind doing with it in the moment? And yes, we can do the best we can to work with this and improve that, but that in that working, if we're working with right effort, we're working guided by chanda, by that interest and energy and thinking things through, then that effort can be made to improve things. And if things do improve, fine. We're glad about that, but we don't get drunk on it. And if things don't improve, then we recognize, okay, well that didn't work, but we're not broken-hearted over it. We're not stressed or at a loss. We don't feel a sense of loss on account of that, but rather, okay, well that didn't work, so let's try something else. And so that the whole way that the mind relates to success and failure and gain and loss is radically shifted. So maybe one last question. This woman on the aisle there. Yes, it was you? Yeah, you had them.
Was pretty similar.
Oh.
Because we've obviously been chatting quite a bit about this. But is it on? Probably not. Oh, it was on. But you just touched on sort of spiritual strength.
Yes. Paramita.
Okay. Can we explore that a bit more on? So basically, my question was originally, this is great to talk about, how awful it would be if we won the lottery, which everyone will share. But when it is hard to put food on the table, or you're a single parent, or it's just hard because you don't have enough money, how does one get through? And you mentioned something about this sort of sense of normality. Did you mean in satisfaction on that normality?
I spoke about normality in the sense of that we overlook the present because we think, okay, when I've got some more money, then when this debt has been paid off, then it's going to be better. So we devalue what is normal, what's familiar, because over there it's going to be better. So that, or it can be the opposite. It can be like with a feeling of threat. Oh dear, it's going to be terrible over there. But one of the things that I often point out in the Thai language, the word for ordinary is thamada, and that comes from the Pali Dhamma, meaning of the nature of Dhamma. So the word for ordinary or normal, it's like, which kind of implies therefore not special, to kind of ignorable or not significant. That within it, the clue is that's the Dhamma is right here and now. That's the norm. That's the Dhammata of the nature of Dhamma. That is, it's right here and now. So that's what I was talking about, normality. And in terms of the paramita, that in the Buddhist teachings, Buddhist tradition, these are the qualities, they're like the spiritual virtues or spiritual qualities that the Buddha and all of us are capable of developing. And in the Theravada tradition, there's 10 of them that are enumerated. And it's interesting that in Ajahn Chah's monasteries, and Joseph Capel was here. Joseph, are you still here? We moved on. So Joseph, who was sitting where Ajahn Sundra was sitting now, so he was my first teacher at Wat Pah Nanachat. Not Ajahn Sundra, but the fellow who was sitting in that chair earlier. Joseph Pabakaro, he was the abbot at Wat Pah Nanachat when I went there, and he was a student of Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah's attendant for many years in Thailand. So I was going to turn to him and see if he could back up my statement. But my experience of Ajahn Chah's teaching is that he would far more often talk about building paramita, building those spiritual strengths, rather than ever talking about realizing stream entry or enlightenment or other kinds of, any kind of spiritual achievement. He would be like sang barami, build the paramita. So you're developing patience, you're developing honesty, you're developing generosity, you're developing resolution, you're developing equanimity, you're developing kindness, you're developing wisdom. And so the 10 are it's already 4:10, so it's probably a good theme for a different Sunday afternoon. But these 10 qualities are potentials that we have as human beings. They're skillful qualities that the mind can develop, and that if they are given energy, if they are say brought to fulfillment, then they are the kind of strengths that help the mind to make the very best of every situation, to help us to be more patient with adversity, to be more wise with and discerning with blessings and difficulties, to be honest, to be kind, to be generous and unselfish, and so on. And so that the spiritual training, if it's seen as opportunities to develop the paramitas, the 10 paramis, then that I would say that's the real wealth. That's the bank to trust in. If you're looking for an ethical bank, the Paramita Incorporated is the place to put your investments. Seriously, I'm kind of joking, but not joking, because that is a really reliable resource to develop resolution, patience, kindness, equanimity, wisdom, generosity, renunciation, the energy, and so forth. That the abilities that we have to develop those qualities, then they are fortifying the heart. They're a set of skills and strengths that the heart has, irrespective of external circumstances, whether there's poverty or abundance, whether there's peacefulness or agitation, activity. Then those paramitas, they're like a bank account you can keep drawing on in every circumstance. So I think that's a good place to draw things to a close this afternoon.